Hello, everybody. Welcome back to AIDC 21, third session of the day. And I'm very excited and happy to introduce you to Diane Elkins of Artisan Learning. She is the owner of Artisan Learning. She's an award-winning instructional designer. She's been around forever. What is it, like at least a couple decades in e-learning, right, Diane?
Yes,
Yeah,
unfortunately, yes.
we're just talking about that, and so I'm so glad that she is participating in this in a TLDC event. I'm happy to have her here, and we're going to be talking about designing accessible systems training. And so she's got some more like hands-on stuff that she's going to be showing everybody now. So everyone enjoy the session, and I'll go ahead and get myself hid here.
Okay, thanks, Lise.
Sure.
Welcome, everybody. I know that you just had some great sessions with Sherry and with Susie to understand a lot of the foundational concepts around accessibility, who it is we're trying to include, who we are, why we're doing it, some of the common myths. And what I would like to do is dive deep to a very specific type of content. So a lot of the strategies you'll be learning today will apply whether it's compliance training or soft skills or whatever. But in my opinion, systems training, meaning how to use some type of computer system or web application, is a very unique set of challenges. And that's what I'd like to focus on. So we're going to roll up our sleeves a little bit and get into some of the details about how to make systems training more accessible. And we will be looking at the four main categories of folks we want to make sure we're including. So we have folks who have challenges in the area of audio, visual, motor, and cognitive. But I want to first mention audio and cognitive have the least differences for systems training versus other types of content, in my opinion. And that's really, again, what I'm focusing on is how is systems training different than other content. So there's a lot of strategies to include and be accessible for folks with audio challenges. It's not that much different with systems training. You know, we want to do closed captioning. You know, here we have sign language interpretation, which is awesome. And the same thing with cognitive. There's not a lot that's going to be different. So I'm going to spend most of my time on how the motor skills and the visual impact of systems training. So I'm going to share my screen, if you'll bear with me for just a moment while I get it set up. And we are going to try out a lesson in Microsoft Excel. So let me share my screen. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play this lesson, and I want you to just experience it the first time. Then I'm going to play it again, and I'll give you an assignment for something specific to consider while you're going through it. So I will play it the first time.
To set up conditional formatting, start by selecting the cells you want to format. Then on the Home tab, click the Conditional Formatting drop-down button and select the type of formatting you want. Next, you'll select the type of argument you want. Next, enter the condition. From there, pick the formatting you want to use on any cell meeting that criteria. Here you can either select one of the pre-made options or choose a custom format. Once you're done, click OK. Now the formatting is automatically applied and automatically updated when the values change.
Okay.
To set up conditional formatting,
start
by selecting.
Stop.
You can either set up conditional.
Now what I'd like you to do is I'm going to play the video again, and I'd like you to consider what critical information would you lose if you couldn't see what's happening? If all you got was the audio and you couldn't see the screen, what key details would you miss? And I'd like you to let me know in chat. So in chat, as you see something important visually that's not there in the audio that you would miss if you couldn't see it, let me know in chat. Okay, let's go.
To set up conditional formatting, start by selecting the cells you want to format. Then on the Home tab, click the Conditional Formatting drop-down button and select the type of formatting you want. Next, you'll select the type of argument you want. Next, enter the condition. From there, pick the formatting you want to use on any cell meeting that criteria. Here you can either select one of the pre-made options or choose a custom format. Once you're done, click OK. Now the formatting is automatically applied and automatically updated when the values change.
Okay, let's see what you all have in chat. And you all have a lot. I mean, there is so much information that is only communicated visually, that this is not an inclusive lesson. Now, programmatically, I could make it so that this, and by the way, this was done in Storyline, I could programmatically make this so that someone using a screen reader could function in the course. But that doesn't mean they would learn anything. They wouldn't learn what they need to know. And some of the things that you mentioned in the chat here are big picture. Like, I don't even know what we're trying to accomplish here. Like, if I can see, I at least get an example of why might I want this. I would have a sense of what type of formatting you can apply. I have a sense of what type of arguments you can use. And then even the specifics, like how do you select that column? Now, I could argue maybe that's not the goal of this lesson, that you should already know how to select a column. But still, you and I, if we could see it, we would get a refresher on how to select a column that someone who couldn't see would not get that refresher. So what do? A whole lot of alt text? Not really. A lot of what we can do just with clearer writing. Now, I know in the sessions you've already had, one of the things that will probably be a theme all day is that accessibility enhancements often benefit everyone. So I'd like you to consider this version of the lesson instead.
Here I have an inventory spreadsheet, and I want to highlight in red any cells where the item has more than $5,000 tied up in inventory. To set up conditional formatting, start by selecting the cells you want to format. So I'll select the header for the inventory value column. Then, on the Home tab, click the Conditional Formatting drop-down button and select the type of conditional formatting you want. In this case, since we want to highlight cells that meet certain criteria, we want Highlight Cells rules. From the flyout menu, you'll select the type of argument you want, such as greater than or less than. In this case, we want anything greater than a certain value. In the dialog box that appears, enter the condition, the value for the argument, in the first field. We want to format cells that are greater than $5,000. So I'll enter $5,000. In the field next to it, you pick the formatting you want to use on any cell meeting that criteria. To do that, click the drop-down menu, where you can either select one of the pre-made options or choose a custom format where you can set your own formatting for shading, font, and border color. In this case, I'll select one of the pre-made options with a light red fill and dark red text. Once you are done, click OK to close the dialog box. Now the formatting is automatically applied. Every cell that shows a value over $5,000 is shaded red, so I can quickly see where the issues are. And the formatting updates automatically. If I have an item with $7,000 in inventory, it's shaded in red. But if the inventory goes down to $1,200, the shading goes away.
Okay, so that included a lot more detail, both the big picture context, as well as some of the details about where to click. So I want to highlight a couple of things specifically. So let me play a few parts at the very beginning again, and I'll stop it periodically and comment.
Here I have an inventory spreadsheet, and I want to highlight in red any cells where the item has more than $5,000 tied up in inventory.
Okay, that little bit right there. When you're trying to use this approach, where you're trying to do inclusive design, universal design, meaning can I provide enough detail for everyone, enough for the individuals who can't see it, but not overloading it with detail so that it feels cumbersome for those who can see. It's a balance. So if I have vision, I can find out a lot more about that spreadsheet than what I just put in the audio. So I can see it's 7 columns. I can tell that the values range from $55 up to over $10,000. I can see we have quantity in stock and reorder level. So I am bringing in a lot more information with my eyes than I put in the audio. But I put in the audio enough to be relevant, because part of what you want to manage when you're trying to be more inclusive in your writing is cognitive load and time. Because if I had had this script say, okay, we have an Excel spreadsheet. There are 9 columns: item number, description, unit price, quantity in stock. I mean, that would be awful for everybody. And for someone who couldn't see, their cognitive load, they're trying to process all of those columns, and I don't know what's important yet. I don't know what's relevant yet. I'm not sure what I have to keep in my working memory. That's going to bog them down in irrelevant details, and it's going to make the lesson 10 times longer. And so we have to decide very carefully what's going to be relevant or not. So let me play that section again and think about what is included and what is left out. And is it enough for the lesson that I'm trying to teach?
Here I have an inventory spreadsheet, and I want to highlight in red any cells where the item has more than $5,000 tied up in inventory. To set up conditional formatting, start by selecting the cells you want to format.
Okay. So I can't tell you that what's written on this script is the right amount of detail. It's what I chose in that moment. One of the things that will be especially important when you want more inclusive design is to include the people who are going to be most impacted by your design and get their take. This is my take. So is it the right version? I don't know. But to me, it felt like enough to help you understand what we're trying to accomplish without giving too much detail. Now, let me show you one more little example here. When we look at the conditional formatting drop-down menu.
Select the header for the inventory value column. Then, on the Home tab, click the Conditional Formatting drop-down button and select the type of conditional formatting you want. In this case, since we want to highlight cells that meet certain criteria, we want Highlight Cells rules.
Okay. I did not list all of the other things on that menu. For those of us with vision, we know that there are now at least 5 categories of conditional formatting. If you only were relying on the audio as your alternative text, you wouldn't know that. Is that okay? That's, again, a judgment call you have to make. You could argue that this lesson is just for this particular type of conditional formatting. But you also need to recognize that those of us with vision will walk away with more context than someone who doesn't. Same thing on this flyout menu. Listen to how it was handled.
From the flyout menu, you'll select the type of argument you want, such as greater than or less than.
There, I have a such as, because if I just said the type of argument and I can see the examples, I know what I'm talking about. If you couldn't see the examples and you just hear type of argument, I might go, I wonder what she means by argument. So I didn't read them all out, but enough to let you know, oh, greater than, less than, I got it. I know what you're talking about. Could I have listed them all? Yes. So this is a design that tries to meet everybody's needs as best as possible. More of a universal design approach. Does it fit the bill? Again, I would encourage some user testing because let's be honest. Yes, I wear glasses, but I have corrected 20/20 vision. I don't have issues with my hearing or my mobility. Like, am I the worst person to have this conversation with you? I'm the worst person to make final decisions. I'm a great person to ask hard questions based on feedback I've gotten from learners. So it's really up to you and your audience to come up with what's right. So if you went with a universal design approach, I think this is a nice medium, and I think it helps everybody. If you have full hearing, full mobility, full vision, you will benefit more from this lesson than the first one. It's clearer on so many levels. So in many cases, accessible design is better for everybody. But what if it's not enough? What if the person who can't see does need more help? does need more information than feels appropriate to give to everybody. Well, then you can do what's called an audio description file, where you have this is the primary video and then have an optional version of the video where extra visual details are added. So let's try out one of those.
There is an inventory spreadsheet with details like item number, quantity in stock, and the inventory value in dollars.
To set up conditional formatting, start by selecting the cells you want to format.
The demonstrator clicks the heading for column E, inventory value.
Then, on the Home tab, click the Conditional Formatting drop-down button.
A menu of options appears, including highlight cells rules, top, bottom rules, data bars, color scales, icon sets, as well as options for managing rules.
And select the type of formatting you want. In this case, since we want to highlight cells that meet certain criteria, we want Highlight Cells Rules.
When the demonstrator selects Highlight Cells Rules, a submenu appears.
Next, you'll select the type of argument you want, such as greater than or less than.
Okay, I'll stop it there. Once again, you will still have to make decisions about how much to include for this audience. So in this particular case, there was a little bit more detail about the spreadsheet. In this case, we did list all of the items on this first menu, but not all of the items on the second menu, because once again, you do have to be careful about cognitive load. Because if I go through and in that audio say, your options include greater than, less than, between, equal to, text that contains, a date occurring, duplicate values, more rules. Like that's a lot for someone to process when I'm not asking anybody else to really process that. And so it could end up raising more questions than it answers. Like, are we coming back to that? I don't know what a date occurring means. So you still have to make some tough decisions about what's appropriate to change or to include or not to include. Now, technically, how do you make one of these? Well, you just use any video editing software to splice in that extra voice. You can either do it yourself, which is what I did. I made the video in Camtasia, and it was my voice for the primary narration, and then I used text-to-speech using a software called Descript that I think does a pretty decent job for that intermediate voice. They do recommend that you make the voice very distinctly different. So that it's really obvious whether you're listening to the main narrator or this audio description person. You can also use third-party services like 3Play Media. They can do it themselves. I have found, though, that when I have had them say, hey, you guys take care of it, they make different decisions than I will about what's relevant. So I'm a control freak. So I personally would want a little bit more control over what we choose to say and not say in that audio description spliced in portions. So those are two different ways to manage what I call the sit back and watch lesson. You can either try and incorporate the key details into the main narration. And again, I think that helps everybody. And or provide an optional audio description version that gives that extra information. Okay, I'd like to take just a minute to field some questions. And with so many people on the line and so many of you giving some great feedback in chat, I'm afraid I have not been able to keep up with any questions that have come in along the way. So if we could take just a second, if you can re-ask any question you'd like me to address, I am happy to do that. So if anybody has any thoughts, I'm happy to do that. So we'll hang on for just a second, see if any come through. Watch.
Yeah, things were flying by pretty good. So, and there were quite a few. Want me to go ahead and read one off to you?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Luis.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Anu is asking, would a vision impaired individual be able to first watch this video and then access the options at various places in the spreadsheet in more detail through Excel's native accessibility tools?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that brings up a good point. And that is one of the things you have to consider first and foremost is the software itself accessible? So we're going to cover that in just a minute. So if you can hang on to that thought for just a second, I want to address that because someone who uses a keyboard with or without vision is going to use software differently than I am. And I need to think about how that's going to work. So that's going to be a whole thing we'll talk about next. So great question.
Yeah.
What else?
Let's see. Let me go down here. There was one I was looking for that that was asked a little bit ago. But how would you prioritize the choices for a paid course, which would be available on a platform for a global audience?
Mm-hmm. How would I? I'm sorry. How would I prioritize? Is that what
Yeah.
you
How
said?
would you prioritize the choices for a paid course, which would be available on a platform for a global audience?
Well, I think the more you know about your audience, the better. I think it is easy for organizations to say, "Oh, well, we don't have anybody with a disability in this job," or my favorite, as in not my favorite. Oh, you couldn't do this job if you had X condition. But as an instructional designer, that is not my call to make. It is not my call. It is not my job to say what somebody can or can't accomplish in their life. It is not my job to design limits on people. So to say that somebody couldn't do this job, I don't think is a fair thing to say. At the same time, it is good to know who your audience is and such. If you have a paid course, I assume you're going out to the world. And so you have to assume that you have all folks and in your audience. And really, I know we use the term accessibility. I feel like the word accessibility has some baggage attached to it. I've started just using the word access. Who deserves access to professional development opportunities? And I know there's a session later about how to get buy-in. And that to me is a great way to give buy-in is who would we like to get access to this? As opposed to, should we make this WCAG compliant? That's got baggage. But hey, do we want to make sure that everybody can access this? Is there anyone for whom it would be okay that they can't access this training? And that might help you with some of your decisions.
Nice.
So let me circle back to that question then about, how would somebody use the software? So one of the things you have to ask yourself, first of all, is can the software be used by someone who needs to use a keyboard and or a screen reader? Because you can't with all software. So for example, let me just pull up a Storyline course. I do a lot of training on how to use Articulate Storyline. So if I were to teach this, well, guess what? This is not fully accessible software. So if I want to insert a button with a mouse, I can. Great, look, I just added a button. Look at me go. But if I have to use a keyboard, either because of a mobility issue or a vision issue, I can do this. I can press the Alt key, and then I can press N to go to the Insert tab, and I can press IB to go to the button menu, and I can use the arrow key to get my rounded edge button, and I can press Enter. That gives me my crosshairs. I can't do anything else from here unless I can click and drag with my mouse. So you may be teaching software that's not accessible. And so maybe that needs to be a conversation you have is why is your organization using software, especially if it's critical software, like how to submit your time card. So I think that's a bigger issue than just the learning aspect. But if we back up and let's say Microsoft Excel is extremely accessible, we also need to consider that people will use software differently. And so it's a little bit of an ableist philosophy to assume that I should teach everything by how to use a mouse. So if I can't use a mouse, how would I apply conditional formatting? Well, I would go arrow, 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 control space, Alt, H, L, Enter, Enter, 5,000, Tab, down arrow, Enter, Tab, Enter. Boom, I just did it. So now I can ask myself, if somebody needed to use the software that way, would they have gotten value from my lesson? And I think the answer is yes. Because let me back up. One of the things you have to decide as an organization is what foundational skills do you need to teach? And what foundational skills do you need to teach in this lesson you're working on? So for example, if I have to use a keyboard in Excel, like most of what I just showed you is very typical for most software, like the Alt T key to get all of those numbers. It might be okay to assume my learners know how to do that. If I have a learner who uses a screen reader or uses a keyboard in their daily life, they know this already. So if I tell them that conditional formatting is on the Home tab, they already can figure out how to get there. I don't necessarily have to make a second lesson that specifically teaches them how to do that. Now, that's unique. I mean, that's universal. Tab, tab, enter, down arrow, tab, enter. That's very universal to a Windows operating system. However, the fact that I had to press Control Space to do select a column, Shift Space to do a row, that is Excel specific. So do I teach that? Well, that's one thing you might want to consider with any software is maybe you create one lesson that's here's how to navigate this software in general. You know, if I'm doing a whole series on Excel, maybe I have one lesson that's about how to use the accessibility features. And then I don't necessarily do it in the other ones. The other thing you can do is a tip sheet. Can you provide a PDF or some other tip sheet that provides that information? So again, I'd really encourage you to work with a focus group of individuals to find out what would be most helpful to them. Because, you know, if you spend a ton of time doing a lesson a certain way, when what they'd rather have is a list of the keyboard shortcuts, or maybe you have a button that's an overlay that for any lesson, it says, hey, click this button and you can get the procedures listed as keyboard shortcuts instead of as clicks. So those are a couple of ways that you can manage that dynamic. Now, I also want to say a few words about practice activities. Those are way more challenging to manage for individuals with a screen reader or a keyboard only. So let me pull this up. So here I have a practice, and I'm going to use it first, assuming I have vision and the use of a mouse. So there's no audio on this one. This is a practice. So assume I've been given the instructions to basically do the same thing. And so I'll say, okay, I need to select column E, inventory value. Great. And then I get the next one wrong. I think I have to go to the data tab, which I don't. It gives me a message, incorrect, please try again. Okay, I'll go click here. If you think about it, a practice like this is basically a multiple choice question. So let me refresh this, restart. Because right now, the multiple choice, my options is I could click on anything. It's like a multiple choice question with 100 options, because I can choose to click column E, I can choose to click conditional formatting, I can choose to click the data tab. All of these are options in this multiple choice question, right? And I either get it right or I get it wrong. However, if I'm using a keyboard and I'm going to press tab, there's only one option on this slide. It's a multiple choice question with one choice. It's the only thing I can activate. It's the only button on the slide. If I use the default settings in Storyline, Captivate works very similarly. So, does that make this a very robust practice? No, it doesn't. Now, does that mean it's useless? I don't think so. It would be useless as a test. If it was a true assessment where I needed to make sure you understood how to use our mortgage approval process properly before I give you credentials, this would not cut it, because I can only get this right. But as a practice, well, you know, it's one more chance for me to, hang on, let me press enter. There we go. Now on the next slide, I press tab. Guess what? It goes to the one and only thing on the slide. So sure, it's reinforcement, but it's not really assessing my knowledge. So what could I do instead? Well, in Storyline, for example, if I was to put this in as test mode instead of try mode, there's this really nice feature where you can go into form view and you can include some incorrect options. So I can say for the first click, I can put an incorrect option here, and an incorrect option on a data tab. But then what I have to decide is, what do I want the wrong answers to be? Because it's only going to show up as a wrong answer or as an option if I put it in there. So I'm not going to put one on every single button on here. That would be maddening for somebody to go through with a screen reader or a keyboard. So I might select 2 or 3. And then if I'm using, then to set it up for a screen reader, I would need to give it alt text. So I could go through each one of these and once again add these hotspots. So let me just randomly pick a few places. And I'd have to decide how many and which ones and such. So now let me publish this and do my test. Oh, come on, you can move faster than that. There are people watching and waiting. Thank you very much. Suspense is killing me. While we're waiting an interminably long amount of time, one of the things that you'll need to manage very carefully with a practice is the alt text. So what do I have to describe about each of these buttons for folks who can't see? So for example, on that first slide, what do I have to describe about the spreadsheet? I would have to tell them that it's already on the Home tab. And those might not be things that you think of. But if I can't tell what tab it's on because I can't see it and you don't tell me, I think, oh, well, if I want conditional formatting, I go to the Home tab. I go click on the Home tab and it tells me I'm wrong because we're already on the Home tab. I'm supposed to click conditional formatting. So I have to tell them that information. So just like with the lesson, I have to decide what's the right amount of information. I have to do the same thing for a practice. So now, if I go through this and I press the tab key because I'm not a mouse-based user, I can, there we go. There, I have the data tab as one of my options. I have the conditional formatting button as one of my options, and I have the E as an option. So I'll press enter to select that, and there we go. So now I can go on. I press tab. Where is it going? There we go. Draw, and I'll press enter and get it wrong, and it gives me that feedback. So there are ways to manage it, but it is important to really think about the overall impact, including whether or not it's even helpful. Because I know the WCAG standards up one side and down the other, but shameless plug for Susie's book. I'm so excited to dive into Susie's book and learn a few tips about it. I'm so excited. Anyway, I forgot what I was going to say now. I was so excited about the book. So even though I know all the ins and outs of WCAG, you can be compliant without being helpful. And so I always like to have conversations with our clients about that. That sometimes, especially with systems training, instead of bending over backwards to make this practice work in a way that you wouldn't even use the software, that's not helpful. Why would I make somebody go through the software and tab to the right button when in the real software, they don't tab to that button? They would do Alt and whatever. And they can't use those keyboard shortcuts in this practice. So I'm reinforcing something that isn't overly relevant for that audience. So we as an organization may say, you know what, it's not helpful. Let's not make that audience go through it. We can still make it accessible for those who choose to, but let's not require it. Let's look instead at reasonable accommodation and say, if I need to confirm through a formal assessment that this person can use our mortgage underwriting software, I will have somebody sit down with them and assess their skill. Because this is going to be frustrating for them and it's not going to tell anybody whether or not they can truly use the software. So always look at a lens of, is this really helpful? Am I teaching it in a useful way? Am I teaching it in the way that they'll use their software? And is the assessment really helping anybody? And maybe a completely different solution is the right choice. So my goal with this session is to help you to consider your training through a new lens, that it is easy to see software as somebody would who can see the interface and use a mouse, and not everybody uses software that way. Okay. Luis, do we have time to field a few more questions?
We
How we doing
do.
on time?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Can I read a couple off
Yes,
to you?
please.
Okay,
That'd be
great.
great.
So Teresa Vanderpost is asking for a step-by-step process. Would you also recommend to have closed captions at the bottom,
Absolutely.
or using text boxes for the step process in the
I would
recording?
absolutely recommend, if you're doing audio, I would absolutely recommend closed captioning. And I know in tools like Storyline or Captivate, it's easy to have a static transcript over the or off to the side. Closed captioning is highly preferred instead. And I think it's especially important in systems training because it's such a visual training method. So if you can't hear and you can see, you're going to take advantage of all the visuals that you're seeing. And so if I'm having to read over here on the side and keep up with whole paragraphs while the screen is moving, that's too much eye movement. But having the closed captions always synchronized, always there, it's a lot easier for me to flip back and forth. And then the other reason you want closed captioning instead of a static transcript is if you've got two paragraphs, especially if your language isn't super precise, it says something like click here. Well, if I'm reading, I could be reading faster than your lesson is going. Click here. Where? Oh, I'm reading something that hasn't happened yet. So it's going to be really hard for me to make the connection between your visual demonstration and the static transcript. So always closed captioning if you're using audio.
Nice. All right, Lisa Spurko actually asked this question. There's some. She's discussing with Teresa in the Q&A area, but she's asking, "Is click an okay word to use for accessibility?"
It's an okay word to use. It's not the most inclusive word possible. So click assumes mouse, and mouse assumes motor skills and vision. It also, in terms of universal design, if you're on a tablet, you're tapping. So it's not the most inclusive word possible, but it's not going to confuse anybody. I cannot imagine a user out there in the world who maybe cannot see or cannot use a mouse saying, oh, they said to click it. I'm so confused. I don't know what to do. Like, they know what to do. So at Artisan eLearning, we use select as our standard because it's universal. Whether you're using assistive technology or a tablet or a computer, select is more universal, but I don't believe click is a problem.
Great. Okay, I'm going jumping into the chat here to grab some of these that are in the chat area. Leah Chang is wondering do you work with accessibility testers or self-advocates while designing and building these system training modules?
When I can, absolutely. We have a group of testers within Artisan, but we are all, we're not daily users of that assistive technology. And so whenever possible, we try and get the feedback of folks who are going to be most impacted by our choices. Yeah.
Very nice. Okay, and I think that's all I'm kind of scrolling back in the chat area. Let me see one more time. I'll just sort of refresh here to see if there's anything else.
Well, let me put my email in chat if anybody would like to continue the conversation. I've got my email here in chat. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And you can also check out my website, elearninguncovered.com. I've had to take a little hiatus in second quarter, so there haven't been any blog posts in a while, but I do have some accessibility information on there. In fact, I've got a blog post that I'm going to put out next week on screen readers and Storyline. So check it out.
Very nice. Diane, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Fantastic session, and of course, lots of stuff happening in the chat area. So far, you guys, we're just having a really great day here at AIDC 21. And next session, Brian Dusablon, who I know Brian had recommended that I reach out to you for this particular event. So kudos to Brian for that one. But he's going to be coming up next. And with that, I'll go ahead and close out this session, and we'll see everybody in the next one. Thanks again, Diane.
Thanks.
And thanks.